As a podcaster, have you ever considered that some of the things you're doing for your podcast could be tax write-offs? I know taxes are boring. Everybody typically doesn't really like doing them or having to pay them. But today we have Tanya to talk all about things that podcasters can write off, especially when we're thinking about our podcast as a business. So whether you're a new podcaster or an established one, this one is really informative and short. We wanted to make sure that it was to the point, got all these ideas across, got you thinking outside the box, along with some really impactful resources that we mentioned at the end to help you during your tax season. And even if you're listening to this when it's not tax season, these are all things that you should be considering, especially if you are in the beginning stages of your podcast and you want to be thinking about it as, is this podcast going to be a hobby or is this going to be a business? Now, during this conversation, we are talking specifically about taxes in the United States. This is not tax advice. These are just strategies that you can think about and consider, and things that you should be bringing to your tax prep person, or if you are in a specific state, looking at what your state laws are and all of that fun stuff. This is not tax advice. This is just some things to consider. Please join me in welcoming Tanya to the podcast. Hello, Tanya. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. If you could start by telling everyone a bit about you and your podcasting journey.
Hi, Alicia. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Tanya. I do taxes and accounting. Done that for 20 years. That's my life. My podcasting journey is not that great. However, I do work with lots of podcasters and I do have a lot of respect for it because, in all honesty, I'm being just totally upfront. I started and I consider failed like 3 podcasts myself. It is so much work and it entails so much. People have no idea. It's exciting. At first, you're like, yeah, I have all these ideas. But then you get into the details of it. It's like, oh my goodness. Yeah, unless you're like pretty much going live and just whatever, if podcasting is hard, even the prep before you put out an episode, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to say? It's a lot of work and I have no time for it, but I always start with good intentions. Maybe someday I'll get a podcast.
I don't think it's a failure, right? I mean, we talked in the green room about my very first podcast, and honestly, I stopped it because I hated the topic. And I just got sick of talking about what I was doing at my day job on a podcast and was like, I need something better. I need something more interesting. I need something I can kind of follow my curiosity with, and then launched my second one. But that first one was, I got pretty far, maybe 40 episodes. But after that, I was like, I'm done. So done. But I think that it gave you, in your podcasting journey, it gave you a respect, right, for
Oh, for
the
sure.
podcasts you're a guest on. And you said
For
you
sure.
focus now on guesting specifically, but you're able to show up and say, like, I respect you. I know what you put into this.
100%. Yeah, I love it. I'll just, come and actually talk and you guys do the rest. It's so amazing. And I, of course, appreciate you, having me on your podcast.
Of course. And also, that's why companies like mine exist, right? For podcasters who are feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling frustrated. Usually, when people get to me, they're like, I can't do this anymore. I want to keep doing this, but I cannot. What are my options? Right. And which is why, like, when I created my company, I was like, full service. You record, we do the rest. I don't want to have to like manage with the team. Yes, we do that too, but like, just being able to provide a service that benefits people who want a podcast but are feeling maybe overwhelmed. So you mentioned taxes, and before people were like, boring, I don't want to think or talk about taxes. It's such an important part of our lives. Sadly,
It is.
it's just
It
part
is.
of our lives. But you have a very interesting topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is taxes for podcasters. So, what are some things maybe that we should initially be considering as we're thinking about the taxes that things we could be potentially writing off, or the taxes around our podcasting?
Yeah, so a lot of people, what I noticed is their mindset when starting your podcast, "Oh, I wanna start a podcast and see how it goes." But in reality, you should be like, "I'm gonna start a podcast and run it as a business specifically." And so when you have that mindset, then you're all of a sudden, like, you're focused on actually earning money in your podcast, creating those either sponsorships or giveaways or, selling something, your mind is a little bit differently focused, but you're also keeping track of your expenses. Now, a lot of times, like I said, I worked with quite a few podcasters, and so they come to me and they're like, "Oh yeah, I have a podcast. I've had it for a couple of years, but this is the first time I made money." And I'm like, "Oh great, what did you buy for your podcast?" "Oh, I didn't buy anything this year. It was a couple years ago." That's fine. You made your money this year. All that stuff that you purchased before was your startup cost. We're going to calculate that in. And so a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either. Like, that is so important to note, right? Especially when you start making money from your podcast, and it's true, it can take a few years for some people. Typically, for us, we look at about 6 months to be turning your listeners into either, your email list, buying from you, getting people on the phone who are saying, "Hey, I wanna work with you. I listened to your show. I'm fangirling. Here's my credit card." There's a range of time that it can take, but years is pretty typical, and I think another thing that people don't realize is that most podcasters don't really make a lot of money from their podcast. So if someone's like, "Well, I made $150 from affiliates this year from the podcast." So maybe they're talking about a product they like and someone purchased the product and they got a payout from it. What is kind of like the baseline for someone to be able to start considering writing something off? Or is a dollar the baseline?
I would say a dollar is a baseline.
Okay.
Because, especially if you partner with, like, if you do have another business and you're doing podcast as possibly even bringing your own leads into your business, that's marketing expense already for you doing the podcast. Like I said, when starting a podcast, you should not think, "Oh, I'm just going to start it for fun." You should run it from as a business from day 1. The money will come in eventually, But if you look overall, most businesses are in the negative the first 3 years.
Mhm.
So for a podcaster to start making money within the first couple of years, that's really good, on the business scale wise. So I would say start from the beginning, looking at it, claiming those expenses. I mean, not even just claiming it because the startup costs, like the beginning before you make your dollar, those are all startup costs. But definitely calculate that and take those into consideration. They will help you against the money that you actually do when you earn it.
So when we're talking to our tax prep people, right? Whomever that might be, whatever company that might be, or person, what are some things that we can maybe say to push that forward? Like if someone's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, I've never done that before. I've never handled podcasting. Like that doesn't make sense." What are some things that we can say?
Yeah. Instead of calling it a podcast, you should say, I have a business. It's a podcast marketing.
Right. Like really considering it as part of your marketing, which it is. I don't think
It
that
truly
people
is.
realize when you're
Yeah.
thinking about your funnel, when you're thinking about the way that you're generating leads or bringing business in, think about it like your website. Your website
Yeah.
is at the top of the funnel. You're bringing people into your blog. Your social media is at the top of your funnel. If you're spending money on ads, those are marketing costs. These are all things that you can write off while you're building that business. And so having that podcast attached is such an easy way to just say, this is all part of my marketing. Now, if you're someone who is maybe doing it as more, I hate this word hobby, doing it as more of a hobby, are there any options for those folks? Say, I have a true crime podcast and I end up getting a sponsor. Cool. What are some things that we need to be considering there?
Yeah, also, if it is truly a hobby, like you have a regular job and then you just do crime, which I love this too. But you really don't realize is if you do get a sponsor, you still can deduct your expenses for the podcast just up to whatever you earn. If you're running it as a business, you can lose money in that business. But if you're running it as a hobby, it's only up to the maximum of how much you earned as a hobby. So say you earned $150 and then your mic was, I don't know, a good mic is like what, $150,
Yeah.
right?
Mine's like
Well,
250.
250. So let's go with 250. You're $100 in the negative, but as a hobby, it would just stop at 150. Because most people don't realize hobby income is still taxable income.
Starting at what point? Because I know there's rules to that, right? Of like if you're, and maybe I'm thinking about this wrong, if your business doesn't make a certain amount of money within a certain amount of time, it's considered a hobby. And we're talking US IRS
Right.
stuff, right? Like for anyone who's like,
Yeah.
wait, no, we're talking the United States taxes. Check
Yeah.
with a tax person near you if you are not in the US. Also, still check with a tax person near you who would know your state laws, etc. And so, what are the rules for like if your business, like at what point your business turns into a hobby? At what point of like losing too much money?
Yeah. So basically, there is no black and white rule for this. It's more of a gray area. And it really, if you get audited, it would depend on the auditor if they wanted to turn it into a hobby. But kind of like a general suggestion, maybe per se, is 3 years. Like
Okay.
if you're in the negative 3 years continuously, like what are you doing? You're not making money. You're not earning a living. What are you doing? But in reality, a business could take 5 years. You just need to, like, if you're being audited, you just need to prove that the intent to earn money is there.
Which is why it's important that you're thinking about your podcast as a business, right? Because you're going to approach it completely different than if you were approaching a hobby podcast, right? You're thinking about it different. You're probably not going to pod fade because you're like, no, I'm going to stick to this. And I know that it's going to pay eventually, just not right now, but I need to hold off for that moment. And so it really is, it allows you to show up different for your audience too, I think, which will allow your content to be better, allow you to show up better. And then when that time comes, when you're able to make money from your podcast, then you have those benefits. What are some other things that we should be considering as we're doing our taxes and we have a podcast?
Yeah, so a lot of times podcasters, they just, set up a microphone in their dining room, in their bedroom, on the bed. I mean, wherever you go, right?
Closet's the
That's
best place.
Yeah, but I would recommend if you have space, designate a specific space, like in your house, in your apartment. If you have a one bedroom apartment, possibly look into a two bedroom. It's not that much more expensive usually. And designate that one bedroom specifically for your business that's a podcast. And then that way you are now able to write off a percentage. But like I said, it has to be designated 100%. So you doing your podcast at your dining room table is not designated, even if you use it 100% of the time. It's still a possibility that you'll eat dinner there.
Right. So having a separate bedroom, having designated space so that you can write off the square footage or whatever that is. What are some other things? These are like getting my brain going of like, ooh, those are great points that I didn't even consider. Like, yes, I run my business from this bedroom, right? Like you can see
Yeah.
the background and stuff. This is my office and I've got the whole setup and this is where I record the podcast. But for someone who's maybe has a full time job and is trying to build the podcast business. These are things that I wouldn't even consider in that aspect. What are some other things?
The other most common thing is people don't consider their miles. But if you go to the store, honestly, to even just look, like you don't even have to buy something. But if you go to the store like Office Max and look for things for your podcast or something like that, those miles are tax deductible. You should definitely keep a mileage log.
Or if you're someone who has a studio outside of your house, right? Who
That's
goes to
commute.
okay, so that's
That's
commute.
commute.
Interesting. So that's something that I wouldn't even have considered. That is so fascinating. What about anything like if we are paying for maybe a virtual assistant to help with the production of the podcast, are those things tax write-offs?
Of course, anything that helps you with your podcast is a tax write off. So if you have a virtual assistant, basically and especially if they're overseas, make sure you're using a reputable company like Upwork, or and then even PayPal would work. As long as like there's invoice connections, like there's proof, you're not just taking cash out of the bank and telling the IRS, "Oh yeah, I paid my virtual assistant." No, that's just cash out of the bank. How do we know you paid, you know?
Yeah.
So as long as like paper trail is important, no matter what anybody says, paper trail is important. Also, your receipts are important. A bank statement or a credit card statement is not the answer. They
Mm.
will have the store and the amount, but it will not have the details that you purchased. So, like if you go to Walmart and you literally buy $200 worth of stuff for your office closet, whatever, and you don't have that receipt, the if you're ever audited, the IRS may be like, "Well, how do I know you didn't buy food?" You know?
Yeah.
So people think, "Oh, I don't need to keep receipts because I have it on statements." Well, that's not necessarily true because your statements don't actually show what you purchased. Unless you have this custom store card, and the receipts are
Right.
saved like Home Depot does.
Or, like, if you are going to Walmart, I know they have a way that if your card is not attached to your Walmart account, so, like, anytime I use my card, my receipt automatically gets saved in my Walmart account, and I also have the ability to scan the QR code at the bottom of the receipt to then save it to my Walmart account, which allows me to easily go back and see what I purchased, when I
Yeah.
purchased it, and all of that stuff. There's also apps that you can use that can scan your receipts if you're someone who loses paper like I do. Like,
Yeah.
find a way that you can easily just scan them and upload them somewhere secure, obviously, that can be there for whenever you need them. That's so, so important, whether you're, running a business podcast or a business in general.
That's true, yeah.
What are some other things that we maybe aren't considering?
I actually did create a tax prep cheat sheet that kind of gives you like 10 out of the box thinking ways that are things that are tax deductible. 10 is not the only things, but just the 10 most things, and that it kind of gets your mind going. What are some things that can be tax deductible? So definitely I can't just sit here and list so many because there
Right.
honestly is. But you guys can just get it from my website. It's a free download, and yeah, it will make you think outside the box of some of the expenses.
You also have a book specifically for podcasters, like an ebook. Can you tell us a bit about what is in there? And then we'll make sure that we have the link in the show notes for people to go ahead and snag that as well.
Yeah, so as I started working with podcasters, a lot of them just said, "Oh, it's a hobby. It's a hobby. It's a hobby." And no one realized, "Hey, it could be a business." So I literally created a book specifically for podcasters. Is it a business or a hobby? So this way you can really differentiate. And again, it's specifically for podcasters. It uses podcasters examples, so you're not reading it as a general information. You're like, "Okay, yes, I'm doing this. Okay, no, I'm not doing this. Okay, so I do have a hobby. Okay, no, I actually have a business, you know?" So that book is specifically for podcasters to realize if you have a business or if it's a true hobby.
And like I said, we'll have that in the show notes. So please go ahead and snag that so that way you can figure out, right? Like, we're in tax season right now, and we'll make sure that we have this available for people throughout the year so you can be thinking about this and really considering, is this a hobby or is it not? If you're just starting out, definitely take some time, right? To consider, is this something that I want to be making money from? Or is this something I'm just doing for fun? And if it is for fun, could I eventually be making money from it? Let's go ahead and save those receipts now. So make sure
I
that you're
like
thinking
that.
that.
Yeah, I like that. Don't just think about today. Think about it like in 5 years, you know?
Hmm.
And then, like, if you have it set up correctly, then it will pay residuals, continuously
Yeah.
over the years, and compound effect and all that fun stuff.
Boring. Fun for you. The rest of us are like, oh, God.
Basically, like more money in your pocket. That's fun for everyone.
Yes, I can high five to that for sure. Tanya, this has been so informative. I've got my brain going of things that I can be thinking about. I'm sure that our clients and our listeners can be thinking about as we're going into tax season and doing our taxes and thinking about taxes. But like I said, even beyond that, for anyone who's listening outside of tax season, these are things that you really should be considering. as you are podcasting and as you're thinking about your podcast as part of your business? Where can people find you, get to know you, hang out with you, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, I'm obviously on all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, through my Golden Apple agency. And then I'm also on LinkedIn under my name. And then, of course, my website, goldenappleagencyinc.com.
Perfect. And we will have all that linked in the show notes for anyone who's driving and doing other stuff. Tanya, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.